of geographical region, in total, West Asia contributed 4% to world exports. But when you look at some of the countries in the region, you find that their share in the world exports is actually more than all the 46, LDCs combined, which just shows shows the kind of global, challenges that are, there in terms of world trade and economic development. It's not the problem of the countries that have been mentioned here, but it's the nature of the global business that we are discussing, and the trends that we need to be aware of as we discuss, global inequalities and sustainable development generally. Now, I dug deeper again to the shares in terms of commodities exported by the various regions, and as you can see, we mentioned here that when you talk about world trade, it's generally manufactured goods. So when you look at the developed economies, of course, manufactured goods is 68% in 2021, 70% for developing countries, excluding the LDCs. Basically, which means that if you look at the LDCs, which are at the top there, their main export commodities, of course, it's primary commodities, a little bit of manufactured goods, but when you add up fuels and the other non-fuel primary commodities, you're basically looking at economies that are relying on the primary commodities. Now, if you look at the region, the countries in the sub-region, you find, of course, a lot of countries that also rely on manufactured goods as their main export commodity. A few, of course, on fuels because of the nature of the economies, yes. But very, very few of these countries rely on primary commodities. Now, let me try to conclude in the next few minutes. Now, trade and environment linkages have become more pronounced, of course. There's a predominance, basically, of trade affecting some of the patterns of consumption and material extraction that we are looking at. Now, in terms of energy-related and other footprints, as I mentioned, they are also really determined by the exchanges that are taking place between developed and developing countries. Now, I'll skip some of this. I will try to go to my conclusions. Now, I think I emphasize the fact that the transformation among especially the least developed countries is progressing at a much slower pace, and they are being left behind in all indicators of sustainable development. Now, since most of them are net importers of food and some other materials, they are going to have a larger impact from the crisis that is developing, the cost of living crisis. Now, of course, you can talk about trying to link them to value chains, but the opportunities there are much lower and very difficult for them to break into these higher value chains. But continuing on the path of structural transformation with appropriate productive capacities, it would be critical to achieving the Doha Program of Action, which is a program of action for the least developed countries. Now, it's critical, I think, to focus specific attention, particularly of the international community when it's supporting these countries, in order to strengthen basically the productive capacities, but also to look at the deficiencies, particularly in their supply side, things like their quality of labor, technology, infrastructure, and so on. But beyond that, there is also need to look at the international environment. There are specific policies that are affecting the trade of these developing countries. And we talk about their market access. We talk about the international support measures that could be useful for them. And also we talk about the geopolitical tensions which have been affecting global trade, as it has been mentioned. But I can't conclude without mentioning the need to reverse particularly unilateral policies that affect the ability of developing countries to integrate meaningfully in global economies. I think Dr. Khalifa mentioned an issue of the carbon border adjustment mechanism as an issue that could be affecting Qatar. But I think our analysis shows that it's actually going to affect developing countries even more, particularly the least developed countries. So in a nutshell, we need to look at the global trends, as I mentioned, which are affecting the capacity of countries to advance. Sustainable development, particularly achieving the SDGs, depends on pulling up the least developed of the developing countries. I thank you for your attention. I know time was short, but I tried to cover this as quickly as I can. Thank you very much for your attention. And again, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin. We can have one question at least, if there is any. Seems like there are no questions. So we'll move forward to the next session. في الجلسة الثانية والتي ستكون حول محتوى وتطلعات تقرير التنمية المستدامة 2023 نذكركم جميعا بأن مدة الجلسة ستكون هذه المرة أقل من ساعة، لكل متحدث ما يقارب 15 دقيقة تتضمنها 5 دقائق للأسئلة. نبدأ مع دكتور هايمي مونتايا، وهو أستاذ بكلية الطب بجامعة الفلبين، وهو سكرتير الأكاديمية الوطنية لعلوم التكنولوجيا في الفلبين أيضا، وهو عضو مجموعة العلماء المستقلين. فليتفضل.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the Qatar University and everyone Qatar in this region for hosting this particular consultation meeting, which has proven very useful for us as members of the independent group of scientists to get the broad perspective of people and governments from the different regions. And I'd like to present just a brief information about how we think the Global Sustainable Development Report can support progress on the SDGs. Just very briefly on the history of the Global Sustainable Development Report, of course, we are going to release the GSDR for 2023 sometime September this year. And there was a previous one in 2019, and we're going to report as like a midterm assessment as we move to the research, to the agenda for sustainable development in 2030. So it started with Rio +20 meeting, and then we have their annual editions of several discussions and conferences, as well as the ministerial declaration in 2016. And of course, the independent group of scientists, we are the second batch. The first one was formed in 2019 to make the report for 2019, and we're the second group to make the report for 2023, which is, as I said, the midterm report, as we are midway to 2030. And of course, different processes and outcomes were realized in the process, and this particular activity is very important. As has been repeatedly mentioned in the annual reports for the Global Sustainable Report, there's insufficient progress as far as the SDGs are concerned. And as early as 2019, in the GSDR report in 2019, an alarm with evidence was already amplified, showing progress on many SDGs were too slow. And in fact, in some critical areas, there was in fact a reversal, moving in the wrong direction for areas just biodiversity loss, inequality, and climate action. So we need to have an integrated view of the SDGs, and most importantly, as you can see in the right-hand side, the interlinkages of the different SDGs, not to focus on SDGs as individual SDGs, but how they actually work together. So we would like to look on co-benefits and synergies, and also look at the trade-offs that would happen when SDGs link to each other, as well as spillovers in the process. And looking at the 17 SDGs, this is just a snapshot of what we think will be some of the major impacts which are currently experiencing now as far as some of the SDGs are concerned. For example, for SDG 1, no poverty, up to 95 million people are pushed to extreme poverty. For SDG 2, for zero hunger, economic slowdown has actually produced disruptions in food value chains. For SDG 4, for quality education, school closures have affected 90% of the world's student population, majority of which belong to the children and the youth sector. For SDG 5, major inequalities, particularly for gender, has been impacted as well. And also for decent work and economic growth, that's SDG 8 and SDG 11 for climate action. Now, how can the GSDR or the Global Sustainable Development Report for 2023 counter uncertainty with science? And we will do this as we counter all of these negative impacts with science and evidence. So learning from the pandemic to build knowledge of interlinkages among goals and targets, recognizing the fact that we are still in the COVID-19 period, and hopefully we'll now be in the early stages of the post-pandemic recovery, identifying innovative ways to accelerate transformation, as I mentioned previously, resolve trade-offs and contribute to co-benefits and synergies. And assessing options for strengthening coherence among the 4 levers of change introduced in 2019, namely governance, business and finance, individual and collective action, and science and technology. These are very important levers that will bolster our efforts to really go forward to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We have to identify means of implementation that correspond to specific needs and priorities in different contexts, bearing in mind that no single size fit all. We bear in mind that we can only prescribe or suggest frameworks of thinking and possible levers and entry points that can be maximized for countries to actually achieve most, if not all, of the SDG goals. Again, as I said, no one size fits all. It has to be taken into proper context. You know, the social, the cultural, the economic factors that are actually actively playing in each country are unique and different. And charting a way forward for decision makers based on state-of-the-art knowledge from a wide range of experts. We have had the valuable cooperation of different UN agencies and also professional organizations, multi-sectoral consultations. And in fact, this particular activity that we're doing now, this regional consultation, is very crucial for us to